People of Reddit, what's something us Canadians aren't ready to hear? Your geese are giving you a bad name. We've renamed them Cobra chickens. Canadian here from the West Coast. We refer to them as the G-Rex. If you've got a problem with Canada gooses, you've got a problem with me, and I suggest you let that one marinate. Nothing like bringing the kids to the park and have them roll around in goose stick. West Coast Canadian geese are soft AF. I lived there for years before moving back to Ontario, and they don't cross the street and attack you. They just hiss. They are 0-100 from 50 yards away in other parts of Canada, and I don't know why it's different in BC. Let's take about 20% off their squirrely Dan. Musical stopped in my tracks. That birds to blame your geese are giving you a bad name. Musical. Duck you shorsey. I call the geese at my house Cobra chickens now. I knew someone would post this quote, and I absolutely was not disappointed. Every year, Canadians all get together and put their hate and spiteful ways into the goose. Majestic and barrel-chested. The envies of all ornithologies. I'm convinced they secretly are trying to use their geese to take over the lower 48. Lol. I hate Canadian geese so much. They are everywhere. Poop like it is their job, going out of their way to make sure it is done, uncommonly walk sidewalks, and are just loud and annoying. Even had to deal with them on 2 different coasts. There is no escape. Please take them back, Canada. Depends how used to people they are, but if they are upset with you for any reason, they will certainly hiss and maybe nip if they really want you gone. I have never had the misfortune of running across a nest, so who knows then. They are also pretty mean to each other, lol, but they are really nothing to be afraid of. It's just fun to talk about the little asses. Maybe small children need to be supervised, given that their eyes will be within reach. That's actually why most Canadians are so nice. We project all our hate and angst, and the Canadian geese absorb this anger and redistribute it at their leisure. They are that malicious. It's amazing how perpetually angry they are. I'm dying. Rolling. Funny, I call them domestic terrorists. I'll start as a Canadian myself. We probably have a lot more in common with the USA than we'd like to admit. We're just US light. One of the biggest barriers to progress in Canada is how easy it is to point at the US and say at least we're better than the US. Thinking specifically of workers' benefits. For instance, we get 2 weeks vacation minimum, which is at least better than the US, but terrible compared to the UK. Canada, why should we leave America just to visit America, JR? I've literally been saying this for the past 20 years. It's true. Canada is a less angry and fat version of the US. I say this as an angry, fat American. We may have free healthcare, but ER all over the Vancouver area are on the verge of collapse. A 9-hour wait to see a doctor is nothing unusual. Oh, we're getting there. The one and only time I went to Canada, it just looked like another part of the US. There were bigger cultural differences going from the Midwest to the South. You're the only people from an Anglophonic country where I don't immediately notice you're a foreigner. Wait, you are apologizing? Thinking we do have more in common. I often think it's better to look at North Americans from east to west. I really don't see myself Vancouver too different from Californians and those living in Seattle, Portland, especially Portland, etc. I'm sure those living in Toronto are more similar to those in New York. And those in the coast provinces probably have more in common with those in Maine. We don't have much to compare with the American South, though, I think. And Alberta on the west. Well, that's basically Texas. But across the board, we share many similarities. And I think certain politics topics like anti-Trumpism are overblown, although I still doubt 46% of this country would vote for a figure like Trump. We have a lot of MAGA types as you move further and further away from the big cities as well. Conservative views exist, and that's normal and fair. I think everyone is entitled to their own views and opinions. We have our share of COVID deniers, anti-vaxxers, rights advocates, anti-abortionists, etc., just probably less extreme. A lot of people seem to see Canada, as well as other European countries, as super liberal bastions, when really I think we are just slightly more reasonable. The biggest thing, though, is that we probably aren't as Bible-thumping, and religion plays less of a role in our lives. We do not hold the Constitution as the end-all be-all with very outspoken views on Second Amendment rights. And we definitely do not recite a Pledge of Allegiance before each start of the school day, which I find a bit off-putting for a modern, democratic, Western country. As a Quebecois myself, I prefer to huff the copium that my province at least tries to distinguish itself from our southern neighbors. I actually was going to post "You're not that quirky and charming and different." But living in Europe as a Canadian, there's been a lot of crazy surprising differences between us and Americans that I never even realized. For instance, they don't call pencil crayons. Another thing is our Canadian content laws warped us in a good way, very subtlety away from Americans. It's probably awash these days with satellite TV, but with only Canadian content on TV and 50% on radio, our humor is grinning, but I stand by that Canadians aren't as quirky and charming as they think. Ask the men with your constant wearing of baseball caps and shorts down to the knees, still obsessing about the tragically hip and your BBQ and loaded Caesars. Depending on where you are in the US, that's not an uncommon wait time for the AR here either. My possibly controversial statement is that Canadian identity is more based in not being the US than they'd like to admit. Thanks, Yak Ducker 5000. Quebec culture is pretty much the only thing that distinguishes Canada from the US. Most things that are internationally known for being Canadian are actually from Quebec. Poutine, hockey, maple syrup, the maple leaf, Cirque du Soleil, Celine Dion. The Canadian national anthem was written by a Quebecois, in French, as a nationalist song. Even the name Canada, and the term Canadians, was initially used for French Canadians only. Other parts of Canada were populated by loyalists that came north from the US when the US seceded from the UK, hence why English Canada is so American. Also, the language makes it so that every English-speaking Canadian artist that's a little good will move to the US because the market is bigger there. Not blaming them for doing so, just a fact. I've literally been saying this for the past 20 years. It's true. Canada is a less angry and fat version of the US. I say this as an angry, fat American. I'm curious why only the last 20 years? Did you notice a change? I find similarities have existed since around the 1930s Depression and wars, with a bit of a bifurcation in the 80s when Coke and bonds corrupted the American dream, and we're getting there now with housing. With Diet America. As someone from the US, I'm so sorry. I don't remember where I heard it, but at some point I was told that Canada is just the US of 5 to 10 years past, which doesn't ducking bode well for the next 5 years. Actually, one of the biggest barriers to progress in Canada is brain drain to the US or deliberate suppression of Canadian industry by the US government. The easy target to point and blame is WAY down the list of things that are holding us back. I'm sure if everyone in the US could afford to go to the ER, they'd be more crowded here. How dare you? Signed a fat angry Canadian. Canada is a less angry and fat version of the US. As someone who's lived here his whole life, I notice we're getting fatter and angrier. We're a decent middle ground. Not awful, but not great. We get some time off, but not much. We have some worker protection, but it could be better. We have some affordable housing, just not anywhere people seem to want to live in great numbers. We have more than 2 political parties, but they all suck. That sort of stuff. It sounds like Mississippi syndrome. In Louisiana, we like to compare ourselves favorably to Mississippi, but, objectively, we are trash. This, compared to a lot more progressive countries, Canada is really ducked up. Compared to the US, we're doing okay. We can't compare ourselves to a dumpster fire and then think we're going okay. Also, with racism, I see so many people in Canada talk about how bad the States is. Hello, our residential schools. Yeah, that is so true. Saying at least we're better than the US is like saying at least our 20-year-old jalopy is better than the cars at the scrap heap. Being better than the bottom of the barrel isn't exactly an achievement. We need to compete with Western European countries. I took my daughter to the ER with pneumonia. She's 6 and had a lot of trouble breathing. We were there for 11 hours in my small town ab hospital. There was another boy about the same age profusely vomiting all over himself and the floor. He was there before us and didn't even get seen. Pensive face. Our health system is so ducking broke. Of my nearly 4 decades of working, I've never had less than 2 weeks paid vacation per year from any of my employers, and at least 2 have given me 4 weeks right out of the gate. Currently, I get 3 weeks. It's true that not everyone gets paid time off, but the vast majority do. Roughly 85% of US workers get paid vacation, and that paid vacation averages 10 days, so 2 weeks. The people who don't get paid time off are overwhelmingly part-time workers. https://www.cnbc.com/2018/7/5/years. How many paid vacation days the typical American worker gets? HTML https://www.bls.gov/ebs/factsheets/paid vacations HTM. Note in the second one that the one category that doesn't have an overwhelming majority of paid time off is leisure and hospitality. Most of those jobs are seasonal or part-time work. As trade is concerned, Canada is really 10 overseas territories that share a trade agreement NAFTA with the US. Each province of Canada trades more with the US than it does with the rest of Canada. Without the US/NAFTA, Canada's road, rail, and port infrastructure would need to change drastically. Nah, that's Australia. Sticks on fire, yo. As a West Coast Canadian, it's kind of funny seeing Americans in the East Coast talking about Canadian wildfires in the news, when every summer for like the past half a decade I've been choking on smoke from Washington, Oregon, and California while it literally blocks the sun for a whole week. Cough cough, true that. When I saw it on the news it just said Canadian wildfires causing smoke pollution in the US. And my brain immediately said, like it does every year, and then I read the article and my brain went, oh, Ontario, Ontario? When you live in the western end of the US, you just expect everything up the Rockies and to the west to be on fire at some point during the year. Sorry, in hindsight, this was a bad time to drop my new mixtape. Workonian here. Sorry about that. Sorry from Washington. Yeah, we know we've had to evacuate thousands of people from their homes because of these fires. One of the biggest barriers to progress in Canada is how easy it is to point at the US and say at least we're better than the US. Blame Ryan. Adding on to this, your secondhand smoke is causing my allergies to go haywire. Tim Hortons ain't nothing special. Most Canadians would agree with you. Quality went to stick when they sold to Burger King. I'm convinced people go there out of sheer convenience. They're everywhere. Even my small town had 3 of them, and nostalgia from when it used to be decent stuff for the price.